right, hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining me. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, this time of year, it's nearly impossible to overshadow college basketball. But Indiana, well, it happened. More specifically, it was the state's so-called religious freedom law. The legislation generated so much backlash that it prompted the state's biggest newspaper to print this not-so-subtle front-page message to Indiana Governor Mike Pence. Fix this now. The law was revised, and there was a similar story taking place in Arkansas. Governor Asa Hutchinson refusing to sign a religious freedom bill into law until it was revised to mirror federal legislation. All right, joining me now are CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein, CNN commentator LZ Granderson, and criminal defense attorney Paige Pate. All right, so before we begin, gentlemen, let me also play this sound from former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, a potential 2016 candidate, speaking this morning on CNN with Michael Smerconish.
You said earlier this week it won't stop until there are no more churches. And it occurred to me, and I listened to the totality of that interview, that in this particular instance, it wasn't the LGBT community that I think caused the reversal in both Arkansas and Indiana, but rather business interests. You know, traditionally Republicans supporting business interests, whether it's entities like Walmart in your home state, Angie's List in Indiana. React to that alliance, the alliance between the gay, lesbian community and transgenders and those business entities that traditionally would have been in the Chamber of Commerce realm with the GOP.
Well, Michael, first of all, the reason that those corporations put the pressure on Indiana and Arkansas was because the militant gay community put the pressure on them. I found it a little hypocritical when you have companies, and I love Walmart, big company in my home state, but they do business in China, for gosh sake. I mean, I don't think the Chinese are exactly the paragon of human rights. You've got Apple Computer. They're selling Apple computers in Saudi Arabia. Is Tim Cook going to pull out of there? I don't think so. He doesn't mind making millions, if not billions of dollars in cultures and countries where human rights are really an issue. And for anybody to try to draw some comparison between what's happening by not getting a wedding cake made and people having, you know, their hands cut off or being hanged or imprisoned, I mean, I find that a stretch, and I think these corporations really ought to either be consistent, quit making money from these countries that are really oppressing human rights, and quit bowing to the pressure and just sell their stuff. That's what they're in business for, sell stuff.
But that's
quit
the
trying
argument,
to make political decisions.
Governor, that's the argument that's made from the other side about the baker and the florist and the candlestick maker. You're in business to bake a cake. Just bake the cake and go home and be a good Christian, and whatever that means.
A lot of people will do that, Michael. They will bake the cake, but shouldn't they have the discretion? That's really, once again, the issue. If they want to turn the business down, they're not turning down the business of being open, being willing to serve any customer what they've got on the shelf. Again, it's the religious liberty when people are asked to do something which they believe violates their conscience.
All right, did this just become more complicated, or is there more clarity here? So Paige, to you first. Huckabee is saying it's an issue of discretion versus discrimination, and he's drawing the parallels of human rights violations, U.S. doing business with countries that are accused of such, and so he's drawing some parallels to the religious freedom law, and that people should, in the case of their religious beliefs, be able to discriminate, or in his view, show discretion of who they want to do business with.
Well, I think discretion...
I think this is becoming even more confusing as opposed to being more clear.
I think it is, and that happens whenever you try to mix politics and law. Discretion is one thing. Certainly a business has the right to decide, hey, look, this wedding's too big for me or it's too small for me, I don't want to do it. But if there's a state law or a local ordinance or any type of regulation that says, hey, business, you can't discriminate based on race, gender, sexual orientation, then that law should be upheld. And I really don't think that these RFRA statutes will allow these businesses to discriminate. I really think that was the intent, but when you actually look at how the statute reads and how it's been working in several states for the last 20 years, no one has been able to legally discriminate and use this law as a defense.
But Ron, isn't that where we're going with those who have been defending this law, that perhaps this will be licensed to discriminate? But they don't want to use the word discriminate.
That is the charge, but I actually do think we have reached a moment of greater clarity, and it's exactly the opposite of what the sponsors of the law originally intended. I think the upshot of this enormous controversy in Arkansas and especially Indiana, and the enlistment of the business community decisively on one side of this debate, is to, I think, from this point forward, to establish the principle that businesses are going to have to serve all potential customers, and that if you look at what was put in the law in Indiana, it was the exact opposite, I think, of what the sponsors intended when they started out. And the idea that you would be able to say, no, we do not want to serve same-sex couples, I think is now going to be increasingly outside the pale. And
so
that
you're
is
saying as a result of the revision
ending
offering
of this
clarity?
saga.
As a result of the revision
I think it does offer clarity.
Okay.
I think it does offer clarity because I think politically it made clear that the original position is untenable.
All right. So LZ, I mean, this clearly is now an issue that will carry on right into the 2016 elections, because Huckabee is potentially a candidate, and he is very much defending this religious freedom.
Well, first of all, I would like to challenge the idea that the original intent of writing this bill or sponsoring this bill or signing into law was about some of the issues that started with 20-some years ago when the federal law was first enacted. When you look at the timeline and when this went through the pipeline, this came after Indiana first tried to do a same-sex marriage ban and failed. This comes as Mike Pence's name is being floated around as a possible 2016 candidate. He ignored his Republican mayor of Indianapolis pleading with him not to sign this bill. He ignored the Chamber of Commerce pleading with him not to sign this bill because he wanted to make sure he had some sort of conservative cred to be able to tout if he did decide to throw his name into that hat. So I'm not quite sure if the original intent really had to do with protecting religion freedom in the state of Indiana as much as a much larger 2016 projection. Now, to answer your question further, when you look at Mike Huckabee, who has a new book, who is trying to test the waters himself and see if he can get enough conservative energy behind what he may decide to do in 2016, it makes all the sense in the world that he would defend and criticize anyone who attacks this particular bill, because, like Pence, he wants to position himself as a conservative favorite for the general election.
And I wonder, is it really about religious freedom, or is that just the title of this law? But is there nuanced language here instead? Ron, is it really an issue of people feeling like their religious freedoms are being trampled on or are threatened? Or is this a sake of using this word as a cloak in which to say there are some people who we don't believe are deserving of the same rights and freedoms as everyone else?
Well, I think there's multiple things here. I mean, clearly there are people who feel that their religious freedoms are being constricted by public policy decisions, and we saw that with the Hobby Lobby case last year. But I think this does speak to a broader sense of unease in portions of the country about the cultural and demographic transition that we are living through, which is profound. And what you see in Mike Huckabee's comments is an indication of kind of the magnetic pull, the pressure that Republicans face. About half of their base are evangelical Christians. About half of the primary voters are self-identified evangelical Christians. About half of the primary voters are regular church attenders, and many of those are unhappy with what's happening. The problem they've got is that the underlying current of public opinion in the overall society is moving in the other direction. And what we've seen over the past week, not only from Mike Pence, but from many of the 2016 contenders, is how difficult it is to straddle that widening divide. And this is going to be a real challenge for them in 2016. They've got a lot to look forward on the economy to argue about, on foreign policy, but on these cultural issues, they have a very difficult road, I think, ahead, squaring the preferences of their base with the direction of the overall country.
All right, everybody, thank you so much on that. I know we're not done with this topic. It will be back. Ron Brownstein, LZ Granderson, Pate, thank you.